Some of you on the West Coast, good morning. It's good to have you all on. We're going to go ahead and jump into this content. The webinar should be 60 minutes max. We may get done a little bit earlier, but thank you for joining us as we discuss 5 difficult conversation mistakes smart leaders never make twice with their millennials. All right, let's jump into it. So I'm sure some of you have asked yourself this question at one point in your career, or maybe at one point this week. And the question is, geez, how can I thrive in versus survive my difficult conversations with my millennials? Now, we're not assuming with this question that every conversation is difficult. We hope it's not. But we know that most of you on the line have definitely experienced a time where you said to yourself, okay, I'm not really looking forward to this, but I've got to do it. I've got to make it happen. So with that said, let me just get back in our presentation. There we go. All right, so this webinar is for you if you are an expert in your field or if you want to be. If you are proficient in both having and teaching difficult conversations or want to be. If you are a manager, an individual contributor, or senior leader that has influence to lead or be led. If you're willing to implement the strategies you'll learn to have bulletproof performance conversations or difficult conversations that build the relationships you want, these trusted relationships. And our promise to you on this webinar is that we'll teach you a proven step-by-step strategy so that you can do 4 things. Number 1, quickly identify conversation mistakes. Number 2, strategically prevent them and teach others to do the same. Number 3, develop the agility to pivot in your conversations. And number 4, to conduct conversations to build these relationships of trust that we've mentioned. So with that said, on this webinar, heads up, there's nothing for sale, but we do have a very cool gift for you at the end. So if you stay on until the end of the webinar, that gift will be yours, and we look forward to giving it to you. Okay, so here's our question for you. Listen up to this part. Does this sound like you? And these are quotes that we have received from clients that we have worked with across industries, healthcare, hospitality, automotive, you name it. And these are actual quotes, and we're just wondering, do these resonate with you? So here we go. Oh man, is there a script out there that I can give these managers? Are our managers really that clueless on how to connect with their directs? My managers have no idea how to talk about performance. They're doing it all wrong. It feels like when we talk, it goes in one ear and out the other. Here's a good one. There has to be an easier way to have these conversations. Like, we've got to be able to train our managers to do this more confidently. Here's some more. I wake up every night in a panic, or just some nights in a panic, replaying conversations I've had to have with some of my employees. I'm stressed out about my upcoming one-on-one conversation with my employee, and this employee drives me crazy. How about this one? I'm constantly thinking about my goals I'm trying to achieve, and I'm wondering if I'm meeting the mark on the ones that I set at the beginning of the year. Does this sound like your leadership team? It's the end of the quarter again. And for some of you on the line, you may be saying it's the end of the year again. Time to talk about performance. Insert sarcasm, of course. You know, I'm spending way too much time on people-related activities and matters and not enough time on revenue-generating activities. Significant distinction. And I secretly wish I knew how to build relationships quicker with my millennials so that I could use my time more effectively. So if any of these sound like you as a leader, as a manager, or as a team, you're in the right spot this afternoon. Do you often feel like your conversations are working against you rather than for you? And the big thing to understand, and why we're having a webinar on this topic, is because the way we get work done is through conversation. I mean, imagine if you didn't talk to, I don't know, your manager, let's say, or your boss for a day. How much work would you get done? Or your direct report? Now, some of you may be thinking, that would be the most productive day of my year. And I have to say I agree with you on that one. But imagine if it was, that day was a week. You didn't talk to anybody on your team, any managers, any direct reports for 1 week. How much work would get done? And then if you extend that week to a month, you quickly see that our conversations are our vehicle. They're our tool to getting work done. And they're either working for us or they're working against us. So what's the real problem with that? What do we want to discuss? And the real problem is this. We found that most of the leaders or the managers that we're speaking with around the world, they haven't made what we call the leap. And let me explain. So once we make the leap, we're able to have conversations that generate performance, higher performance and accountability, which my guess is that's what we all want on this webinar. Once we make the leap, we're able to deliver tough feedback. We're able to establish clear expectations between the employee and the employer. We're able to get buy-in, perhaps from those resistant team members or member. We're able to navigate employee complaints that come our way. And we're able to motivate our employees, which is huge. Another word for motivate, right, is engage our employees. And last but not least, once we make the leap, we're able to confidently conduct career performance conversations that happen every single year in every organization, from small startups to large enterprises. And in order to make this leap, it requires 5 key shifts to create these kind of relationships that are working for us rather than against us, so that we can help streamline our career and work effectively in teams. This is about high-performing teams and how we can do that. So on the webinar today, we're going to show you exactly what mistakes to watch out for to prevent yourself as managers from making. So let's move on. Just by way of introduction, Caroline already gave me, helped me here, but we're millennial experts at Talent Catalyst. We're millennial experts and strategists. And this all falls into the world of human capital consulting and learning and development, leadership development. So we spend our time coaching, we spend our time facilitating keynotes, workshops, and teaching these tips. We call them tips for thrival instead of survival, with organizations much like yours on the line. Spend a lot of time speaking and consulting on these topics. And if you think that you're the only organization thinking about this, that's not necessarily the case at all. We've worked with Visa, we work with Disney, we work with small startups in the Silicon Valley here in New York City. So organizations are thinking about this, and there hasn't been one organization that's come up to us and said, you know, I've got difficult conversations down. We're good. Thank you so much. And I've got my millennials covered. So you're in good company here. So let's talk about making the leap. First question is, what does this have to do with having difficult conversations? And we say that it has everything to do with difficult conversations, because when we gain confidence and gain a proficiency around doing this, we're not intimidated by it, and we learn how to systematize these conversations. So obviously you're very familiar with these Fortune 500 companies up here on this slide, but these are all companies that have made significant investment in their emerging leaders and in leadership development, specifically around coaching and how to have conversations and build relationships that really can make up teams that perform. All these companies have a mastery around building teams, and they know that teams are the ticket, multi-generational or intergenerational teams. And in order to do that, conversation is crucial. So we'll get into this. And it's crucial, actually. Take a look at the statistics up here. These may be familiar to a lot of you on the line, and they may be new for some of you. But here's the link. So what's interesting is that only 21%, and this is an American statistic, only 21% of the workforce strongly agree that their performance is managed in a way, aka they're having the difficult conversations that actually motivate them to do outstanding work. That's less than a quarter. The second statistic is that this is startling, only 18% strongly agree that employees who perform better actually advance faster in organizations. So where's the motivation for the other, what is it, 72, yeah, 82% there, right? And then the third statistic, of course, is the most widely cited reasons underlying turnover intentions all had to do with people's direct manager. And we're assuming that you're all familiar with the adage, people don't quit companies, they quit managers, which is why our competency, our ability to have these difficult conversations is vital to retaining our top talent and to developing the talent that we have. So without further ado, let's look at the mistakes. So these are our top 5, we call them, difficult conversation mistakes that we've seen over the course of time with millennials and folks managing millennials. So along with the mistakes, we're going to give you our tips for thrival. You're welcome for that word. But this is the antithesis of surviving. I've never met a generation that's more committed to thriving at work than the millennials. In fact, millennials are the first people to say, if I'm not thriving, I'm out, right? I'm going to leave, and there's more jobs than me. So this isn't too super problematic for me. And there's also the internet and technology. And so if I'm not happy here, I can give it a go at being a freelancer, at opening up my own Etsy shop. I can figure this out. But my goal is to thrive. Okay, so let's jump in. All right, mistake number one that we see managers make is being criticism heavy. And to the manager, it may not feel like it's heavy or that it's really criticism at all. But to a millennial ear, it may feel like that. So let's get into it. When we think about feedback, we know that feedback often causes negative reactions, not to the actual content of the feedback. It's how it's delivered that triggers people and causes this, just this like adverse relationship with feedback. Most of us traditionally are trained in the judge and the jury approach of feedback. That's not effective or attractive for millennials at all. We usually, as human beings, we store the negative, right? We store it for our own survival. And so we have this abundance of what went wrong or what we should fix data. And we found that there's a shift that needs to happen with placing more effort on gathering what went well data, which is not about the delivery yet. We're talking about gathering it, which is significant. Another trap is watch out for the tell me the bad stuff first. I worked at a startup a couple of years ago consulting with them, and it was fascinating to see. I thought, everyone I worked with was about 23 to 28 years old, and the first thing after 2 days of a heavy delivery program and in global locations, the first thing we do is go around and say what went wrong, everything that went wrong. The other thing that we're familiar with is the sandwich method. Oh, you did a great job, wait for it, but we know how that goes. And then, of course, the other thing that we have a tendency to do is being critical about the person versus critical about the work. So our tip here to not fall into the traps that are oh so human is to start with always lead with what went well. And we found that this is a tip that's easy to remember. And it's just a reminder. Like it can be a post-it note. It can be something on your phone that says, oh, wait, before I talk to Brian or before I go talk to Jennifer, let me just first think about what did go well. Because if we can't find something that went well, then it all went wrong. And usually that's not the case. It's pretty easy to find, unless we delivered something absolutely perfectly or disastrously, we can find one thing. Quick example of this. I think this demonstrates this really well. I'm not sure how many of you on the line have read Kim Scott's her best-selling book called Radical Candor. But Kim works at Facebook with Cheryl, or at Google, excuse me, and she tells her story in this book, or in her book Radical Candor. It's a great read. And she talks about her first few weeks at Google, and she was tasked to go present in front of the C-suite for about an hour. And she talks about how, she was incredibly nervous going into the meeting, as I think we all would be. And she talks about how, she was monitoring her progress throughout the meeting. And at the end of it, she just thought to herself, all things set aside, that wasn't too bad. Like, that wasn't as bad as I thought it would go. And then she walks out the door, and out of her corner of her eye, she sees Sheryl Sandberg standing right there. And her immediate reaction is, oh my word. Okay, so I must be off, because that must not have gone as well as I thought, since Sheryl Sandberg is waiting to talk to me here. And this is the first thing Cheryl said to her. She said, Kim, you're going to have an amazing career here at Google. And Kim was startled by that, because she thought, wow, that's the best intro I could possibly get, thank you. And then Cheryl proceeded to say 4 specific things that she did well to illustrate her points in the meeting. So Cheryl gathered data. Instead of, hey, great job up there, or you did really well, a pleasure to meet you, she gathered 4 pieces of data, which is so Sheryl Sandberg, right? And then Kim recalls how she looked her in the eyes and said, I learned a lot today from the way you handled those questions. And Kim's memory of it was that the questions were the part of the meeting that she fumbled the ball the most. And so this was really good news for Kim. And this is all taking place in 2 minutes. It's a 2-minute conversation. And then this is what Cheryl proceeded to say. So think about leading with what went well. Cheryl says, you always want to focus on what you think you could have done better overall. And I do too. But I want you to focus on what did go well, because overall, I think, Kim, this meeting was a success. And then very candidly, she followed that up with, you said a lot. Were you aware of that? And asked her this question. And of course, Kim was aware of that. But when you look at this pattern, it's all what went well, and then it's I can relate to you. And then I'm going to give you very candid, data-specific feedback. And Kim's response to this 2-minute conversation was, it made me want to solve my own problem immediately and appreciate Cheryl. It also inspired me to give better guidance to my team. So I think there's 2 things that are so impressive about this approach. 1 is she led with what went well. 2 is she really collected specific feedback, and that's only helpful to Kim because she can go act on it. And what inspires us at Talent Catalyst about this story is that it was 2 minutes long, and now she's going to not only impact, it didn't impact just herself, it's going to impact her team. And that's significant in the busyness of our jobs. It's a double teaching moment there. And we want to show you a model, one of our core models called the emoticon effect. And it's called the emoticon effect because, and this is a great way to illustrate the Cheryl Kim experience, because this just shows us that we actually can affect the way that our relationships go. A lot of times we hold them as fixed and, oh, he is just this way or she is just this way. I have to go have this difficult conversation with Ben, and we all know how he is, right? And so on the left-hand side of this model, I'm assuming if I could see your hands, I would ask you, how many of you have been in a relationship that you feel like you have to be in? And if you've ever been in a relationship like that with a manager or a colleague or a direct report, you know we call those relationships hashtag I can't do this today. And then the next question is the opposite. How many of you have been in relationships where you feel like you genuinely want to be in them? And those are what we call I can't wait conversations, and we're thriving in those. And so the whole trick here with our conversations is our conversations are the tool that can move us along this spectrum. And at the end of the webinar today, we're going to show you a tool that we use at Talent Catalyst. It's a coaching tool to help us move along this spectrum to go from okay or average to great, good to great. And so with Kim and Cheryl, I think it's fair to say that Kim walked out of that meeting going, ooh, or maybe the neutral face. Let's say she's in the middle. Then she saw within, 10, 15 seconds, she saw Sheryl Sandberg standing by the door, and I think she shifted over to the survival side of the spectrum to, oh no, what is she doing here? And then within the first 5 seconds of speaking with Cheryl, where she says, hey, I really learned a lot from you today, boom, she's over to the thrive side. So this shifts with our language. It shifts minute to minute, hour to hour, interaction to interaction, but it's about the language that we use and how we approach the conversation. So that's tip number 1. And this is a picture of our work that we did with Marriott recently. This is part of their Latin American team, where we were talking about feedback, and they delivered this. You can tell that they were pretty happy about this engagement, but we talked about how we can, not emoticon, but how we can shift our relationships. And so we think faces bring this to life, all the emojis to life. And so the shifts that we're encouraging for this first tip are, let's move from discouraging with what went wrong to encouraging our people. And then very importantly, the big shift that's happening in today's workforce is this IQ, where it's all data, to IQ plus EQ. Emotional intelligence plays a huge role in how we have conversations with each other. And I think one of the reasons that Sheryl Sandberg has been as successful as she has been, or at least been as written about as she has, her publicity is linked to just how high her IQ, her EQ is combined with her IQ. So she's a great model here, and we've enjoyed learning from her. Okay, so that's mistake number 1, is being criticism heavy, and there's a way to deliver feedback that doesn't have to land or feel as heavy. Okay, mistake number 2, avoiding negative feedback altogether. We speak with managers who go, yeah, that's actually not as important as I thought. You know, I can avoid that. And here's some of the reasons why. We're scared of reducing the level of productivity or enthusiasm and engagement that our teams have. We fooled ourselves into believing that the individual will just improve on their own without our very data-driven feedback. 3, we believe that negative feedback might bring the morale down, so we don't want to do that. Or maybe we're afraid to hurt somebody's feelings. Or maybe we confuse the word mean with candid, which Kim Scott writes a lot about, right? So our tip in this situation is to build what we call a challenge culture. There's a big difference between a criticism culture and a challenge culture, and we'll tell you what we mean by this. A great example of this is go Golden State Warriors. For any of you who are from California, it's been a good year for us. And this is the example of the swingman, right? Andre Iguodala. And if any of you are familiar with basketball, he's had a really good year and a good career so far. 2012 NBA All-Star. He's won the NBA championship with the Warriors in 2015, and of course this year. And what's interesting about Andre, and this is you can read about this in the locker room. The Warriors talk about how he's notorious for his radically candid feedback after the game. And people just describe him as the minute you want to hear a compliment, that's the last thing that Andre is going to give you, especially if it was a good game for you. And so the quote from an article that we pull from is, Andre says, the secret to winning is to point out to great players what they could have done better even when they just won a game, especially when they have just won a game. The problem with living uphill is always having to walk up the hill just to go back home. To keep winning, you have to criticize the hill. And at Talent Catalyst, we talk a lot about how there's a big distinction between winning games, and we feel like when we are always complimenting each other and saying, hey, good job, and not giving really data-driven feedback and building and being candid with each other and direct with each other, we're enabling ourselves to win games, but not necessarily win championships. And as you can see from Andre, he's a champion. And he firmly believes that in order to keep at that championship level, you've got to know what you can work on, especially when you're performing at your highest level. So when it comes to feedback and building a challenge culture where feedback is invited, some of you on the line may know this acronym KISS, right? Which stands for, you could probably fill in the blank, keep it simple, stupid, right? Keep it simple, stupid. Feedback's simple. But it doesn't feel simple. And so these are tips that we found have been helpful to our clients in keeping it simple, which is use 3 questions max. 3 questions, that's it. Begin with what went well, which we covered. First and foremost, ask for permission before we launch into feedback. Are you comfortable with me giving you feedback right now? Are you open to some feedback? Great game, are you open to it, right? This kind of thing. We also invite the recipient to go first. So recipient, tell me, what do you think went well for you during this game? Now, as the manager, I know what went well. I have a pretty good idea, but I'm not going to go first. I'm going to let them go first so that I can gather, you guessed it, data, right? What are areas that you got stuck on, that you had a harder time in the game? And they'll share, and then that validates that I don't need to say anything now, or I could say, wow, they're off on some things. Really important. Also important to actively listen, be really candid, and give feedback so that they can act on it, just like the Kim Scott and Sheryl Sandberg example. All right, and here's an example of a company that we worked with called Wedding Wire. They're a software wedding company, you guessed it, and they've had an aversion to feedback. Like, feedback is not always easy because they're a great company. And so in a workshop we did recently with them, we got everybody up and we taught a very simple feedback tool, and this is them having conversations instead of avoiding them, which is the second mistake. With the structure and a focus, this became somewhat comfortable, and for a lot of them became very comfortable because they realized, actually, if I just stick with my focus, I can start eliminating all the narrative that I have in my head around feedback being uncomfortable or awkward. So the shifts here with mistake number 2 are moving from confrontation to challenge. And we're going to go through some assessments next, and you'll see that challenge for some people is a huge motivator, huge. Giving them a challenge, and when it's not challenging, they don't perform. And the second shift is moving from aggression to candor. And when we work with millennials, often we find that millennials have a hard time with this distinction. And to other generations, they can come off as being way too direct or aggressive. And so it's teaching millennials how to have that feedback land in a way that's candid, but not aggressive. So a little softer landing there. All right, so number 1, being criticism heavy. Number 2, avoiding negative feedback. Mistake number 3 is reviewing from the past. Reviewing from the past. And so traditionally, when we're reviewing anybody, we look backwards, and that's tradition, right? We evaluate, and we've been doing this since we were in school. And so you look back, you reflect on the year, and you evaluate there. It's also, when we do this, it's easier to link rewards to performance and evaluate that performance from what we've already completed. It's easier to quantify when we do it this way. It's easier to promote someone based on their past experience. And quite honestly, it's a pretty industrial age model to review somebody from the past. I just collect all the data of what went well, and then at the end of the year, I share it with them. Kind of takes the thinking out of it. I have it all there. Our tip here is, especially when working with millennials like things to be real time. Their whole life is real time. Their phone is real time. Their social media is real time. Their conversations are real time. So the past isn't nearly as effective, and it doesn't feel as sincere and authentic at all, especially if we get the data wrong. So our tip for Thrivevival with your millennials is to focus on the future. So rather than reviewing somebody, like I doubt any of us woke up this morning and went, oh, I can't wait to be reviewed today. That sounds fantastic. Nobody really wants to be reviewed, but a lot of us want to be developed. And that's the shift that's happening, is the shift from evaluation and review to developing into the future. That's inspiring. That's motivating to a millennial. Here's a good story from Caroline, our president here at Talent Catalyst, and she was kind enough to let us share this with all of you here on the webinar. This is her experience, one of her experiences at Citibank. And Caroline was a global business partner, an HR business partner on the risk team at Citibank, and she'd been in the role for 18 months, and she was working with a really challenging manager at the time. She didn't really feel like she was being led. She didn't feel like she was being taught much or had the opportunity to really develop, which is what Caroline loves to do. And Caroline loves a really big challenge. And her manager, it was frustrating, I think, for her as well, right? Caroline is a millennial, and I think her manager saw all the potential but didn't know how to connect, right? Difficult conversations were not natural, were not easy, and she just didn't know how to connect. And Caroline was super frustrated, too, for the points here on the slide. And so what this new manager, what Citi did is they hired a new manager specifically to help develop the necessary skills and competencies needed for Caroline to grow in her next role. And it was interesting to see, I'll go back here, what this new manager did. And so they both, the new manager thought, well, if I'm going to help develop Caroline, I'm going to actually, instead of assuming what she likes based on her personality or just finding out what she's really good at, I want to understand what makes her tick. Like what engages her, what motivates her, AKA what gets her out of bed in the morning. And then I think if I could share that data with her too, I think it's going to form a really good foundation for us working together. And so that's exactly what she did. So she had Caroline take an assessment. And this assessment is called What Motivates Me? And what you're seeing on the screen here is Caroline's top 5 motivators: friendship, service, challenge, problem solving, and excitement. So it's no wonder that Caroline was struggling with her previous manager, because was she being challenged? No, and that's her third motivator. Was she given the opportunity to solve challenging or difficult problems? No. So she wasn't motivated. And did she feel like she had a connection, an authentic one, with her manager? No. So you can see why she wouldn't be motivated, as friendship, seeing as friendship as her top. So the managers and her, they compared notes and they started building this foundation, but they didn't build it based off of assumptions, which is what we make when we're not clear on the expectations of one another. They built it off of real data, and this was critical for them. And so you can see that she started asking Caroline every morning, hey, how was your weekend? How's it going? All in an effort to form friendship. Hey, listen, I've thought about this project, and I want to give you a piece of it, but we're going to do it together, and teed her up for what would be a really intense challenge. So at the end of the day, this is what Caroline had to say about it. She said, and this is in the blue, she said, by far, working with her, she was the best manager I've ever had. And she really understood from the beginning what I wanted to do in my career and aligned objectives to make that happen for me. And she said, I continue to measure everyone against her. And Caroline and I have been good friends, actually, when this happened. And so I remember back in 2015 when she was sharing this story with me, and she just lit up every time she talked about this manager. And that's what we all want. We all want after a difficult conversation, because she and this manager had them. But they ended with action, and they ended with, an area to develop. And for a person like Caroline, that was fantastic. So the shifts that need to happen, context. It's all about the context. So we're moving, it's still a review, right, if we want to call it that, but we're moving from the past to the future, and we're moving from this review mindset to this development mindset. And that's a fundamental shift for managers who are looking to build millennial teams and develop solid relationships with their millennials. and get the most out of them. All right, let's move. We're going to go to mistake number 4. Mistake number 4 is no action plan. I don't have a plan for you. I don't have a plan for my team. Let us explain what we mean by this. It's hard to make an action plan as a manager if we don't know our team members well enough and if we don't know their growth strategy. So how could this manager make an action plan for Caroline in the previous example if she didn't know what her growth strategy was? They sat down and had a really frank conversation about that. It's hard to make an action plan for your team if you're pressed for time and if you don't make focused time to do it. It's hard for us to make action plans if we don't have a structure to follow, if we don't have a template. We find this with a lot of new millennial managers, right? You've been promoted. Let's say you're in a startup environment. There's 300 people at your company. Who's giving you an action plan or something, a structure to follow to manage people? I worked in advertising for 7 years. When I was in management roles there, I was never given one. There was no structure. There was no template that I ever saw. We don't provide examples to our team members as managers sometimes. They can be really, really helpful. Another reason why there's no action plan is we assume that the team member is going to generate this independently, which in my career has been the story. It's been the case with all my managers. I think Mala can figure it out. Sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't, but okay on the whole. So our tip here is prepare to act. And we found, generationally speaking, that baby boomers and Gen Xers are much more proficient in preparing, especially preparing to act. We find that millennials, because everything has been, it can be last minute. We can get away with it. We can get information in 30 seconds. We can send a text in 5 seconds, that things are done so quickly that the preparation piece is often a downfall for millennials. So this is an interesting story about a client we recently worked with, Zions Bank. And this is Zions, I'll come back to this picture because it's a good one where they're actually in full action plan mode. And the reason they reached out to us is they said, we are struggling. You can see kind of in that red-orange color there, we're struggling with 2 things, and one is attraction and one is retention. And Zions is not alone in this at all. In fact, there's a huge crisis in the banking industry around branding, and they're having a brand equity crisis. And they said, we've got to understand how we're perceived in the market by millennials, and we have to understand how to keep them here. And so we are in the middle of a rebranding strategy with them where we came together as a strategy group and we said, what's our overarching vision for our teams and for this organization? What's our objective? And we sat there and we created an action plan. What's our compelling why for stakeholders, and what's our timeline? How are we going to communicate that? What's the order of command here amongst our stakeholders? What's our strategy for this vision, and then what's our implementation plan? And so ironically, what we were challenged to do with Zions, it was first of all to think with them, but the harder part for them has been actually crafting an action plan, because for the first time in the history of work, there's 5 generations working together. And this is a whole new problem for an organization like Zions and for a lot of organizations. So how can we create something super focused and that we can implement out of the gate with our key stakeholders and with our teams? So the shifts here are, first and foremost, we've got to shift from the what and the why to the what, the why, and the how when it comes to having difficult conversations, because Zions knew that in order to get buy-in from the senior leadership, they were going to have to have a very concrete how, and they also knew that this may be a difficult conversation because they're going to be asking a lot of their leadership to change their mindset around what work looks like. A second shift here is moving from something that is fixed to this is the way we do things around here, this is the way it's got to go, to something that's a little bit more fluid, right? So when it comes to taking action, that plan has got to be able to shift around, especially when we're working with multi-generational teams. Some people have a propensity, like millennials are going to want to innovate a lot more. They're going to want to shift and have it be real time versus something that's fixed and prepared and planned. So those are the shifts when it comes to following up and with action plans. All right, here we go. So let's move on to our 5th and final mistake when having difficult conversations. And it is simply this. And we say that out of all these mistakes, this is the biggest one and the easiest trap to fall into, which is, well, if it's going to be difficult, let's just not talk. Let's not talk to each other. And we actually were giving a keynote address this morning to a financial firm. And when I said this, they all just nodded their heads. And it was every generation that was nodding their heads. And that's because this has nothing to do with generations. This has everything to do with human behavior. So our tip here is talk like your life depends on it. Talk, talk, talk. And the key to talking is, if it's going to be successful and we're going to thrive, we want to make it very focused. The conversation needs to be focused. So we asked a lot of you who joined the webinar, what type of conversations are you struggling with the most? And so this next slide, you're going to see your responses to us. We thought we'd share them with all of you so you can see where we are. And I'll pop the other column up as well so you can take a look. But career development is no surprise here. How to motivate and engage. How do we deal with overly emotional employees? How do we deliver the hard feedback? How do we work with culture shifts? And generations have a lot to do with that. Mergers and acquisitions have a lot to do with that, right? Happening all the time. How do we deal with employee complaints? How do we lay somebody off, right? Fire somebody? How do we connect with our team that may not be like us or be brand new? How do we talk about compensation? How do we set expectations and clarify those? How do we talk performance, accountability, reorgs, all of these? These are great responses that came in. We shared them with our group this morning and they resonated deeply with these. So these are pretty universal struggles. Why do we struggle? Like, why do we struggle in these conversations? And we think the reason is twofold. Number one, time. We never know quite how long these are going to take. And I've never been in a group with a group of leaders, senior leaders, mid-level managers who have said, you know, I just have so much time, more time than I used to 10 years ago, right? And the second biggest reason here is I don't know how, like, or I have an idea, or I've done things that have worked for me in the past, but I'm working with new team members here, or the team members, like my millennials, they're approaching this whole thing differently than I used to. So I don't know how. These are so valid, these reasons. These are the top two answers we get. And the challenge with these difficult conversations is that they require a risk. We don't know how they're going to go. Sometimes we don't know how much time they're going to take. How are they going to land? What if somebody gets overly emotional, etc.? They require a risk, and bottom line is we don't want to fail. We don't want ourselves to fail. We don't want the other person to fail. We don't want to bring down this morale. So why talk to each other, right? So the question to also ask ourselves is, well, if we're not going to talk, what does that cost us to not take this risk? And when we ask managers this, here are the responses that we get. Well, if I don't talk to my team or to my direct reports or to my manager, sometimes it costs me time. It ends up taking me more time on the back end than it initially would just bring it up. It costs me my remote work access. Maybe I lose some trust from my leaders. Sometimes it costs me compensation. I don't have the conversation that I needed to ask for a higher compensation, maybe higher compensation for some of my team. Sometimes it costs me the opportunity to manage a larger team. Sometimes it costs us the leadership position that we want. Sometimes it costs us the leadership position that we have. Sometimes it costs us our credibility that we're either trying to gain or that we worked really hard to earn. Sometimes it costs us the international opportunities that we could have, especially if we're with a larger organization. Sometimes it costs us our authority, the authority we're trying to gain and worked hard for. Sometimes it costs us the authority that we once had with people. Sometimes it costs us the opportunity to get promoted or to get promotions for folks on our team. And last but not least is sometimes it can cost us our job if we don't have a difficult conversation with the person we should at the time that we should. So when we look at all of these, it's not in our attempt to scare you, it's just in our attempt to say there's a lot on the line sometimes. So it's no wonder that we are a little hesitant to take the risk that it requires to have these difficult conversations. And so at Talent Catalyst, we say that you absolutely can have them, and there's a way to have them confidently so that you know how to, and that you don't feel like it's going to take all of your time, because it shouldn't. So we've developed a coaching model that we call GREAT, because last time I checked, I'm assuming most of you on this webinar have never wanted to walk into work. You wake up and go, oh, I can't wait to have a really average okay day. And I can't wait to just have a fine day. I want to have a great day. And for the most of us, we want our team members to have a great day. We want our colleagues to have a great day. And so it's all about how we have these conversations in a focused way that makes it great. And so we have a three conversation approach, and this is all coaching. And so we teach our managers how to shift from strictly managing, but into coaching these conversations. And coaching is a much different approach to having these difficult conversations, and they're more focused and they land a lot softer, but still have the accountability be on the other end. And so the first type of conversation is the conversation. Let's say I'm the manager, and I'm going to have a conversation with my direct report to get aligned on our expectations. And it could be our expectations for the day, our expectations for the week, our expectations for the month, or maybe it's for a quarter, or maybe it's for a specific project. But I, as the manager, am going to ask my colleague what would make their project or this day great. And they would answer me with their top 3 to 5 things. And so we go back and forth like that. It's one conversation and it's 5 questions to align expectations. Because remember, what we do as humans when we don't have clarity around expectations is we make assumptions. And assumptions are a death trap. And then at the end of that alignment conversation, we're on the same page. We're clear on our expectations, and then we go out to act. And this second type of conversation, it says progress, which is right in the middle there. And this conversation is designed, it's 3 questions. It takes 5 minutes. The first question takes 10. The exchange of this takes 5 minutes just to make sure we're check in with each other to see how we're progressing in the action that we chose to take accountability to do. And then the third conversation is what some of you on this line will be thinking of as a performance review. This is a very informal review, but we don't call it a review, right? Because we're moving towards the future. So this is what we call develop, great development. And this is our development conversation where we really assess or evaluate the progress we've made at the completion of a project or a quarter or a year. It could be whenever you want to have them. You can have these daily. They're designed to have daily or weekly, but you can have them monthly or quarterly. But we've found that with a structure, it makes difficult conversations a lot easier and it takes a lot less time. Okay, so with that said, let's ignore the animation on this slide. Sorry. This is an old one, so we'll move all these things around. Click by click. Okay, so we found that when we've taught managers how to coach and how to coach in a really concise way, it addresses most of these struggles and challenges that people face. When we're clear on our expectations, it already mitigates it mitigates a lot of career development confusion. It mitigates a lot of expectation confusion. It mitigates a lot of resistance that may come up, right? And then when we're constantly checking in real time on the progress of how we're doing with one another, it helps us, again, with expectations. It helps us with what we're taking accountability for. It helps us with motivation, engagement. I'm talking to you every day, and millennials always are asking for feedback, right? Always. So we're always in conversation, but they're structured and they save us time. Okay, so the shift here with this, instead of not talking at all, we encourage you to talk. Talk like your life depends on it. So the shift is, let's move from something unstructured, full of assumptions, to something that's very focused, where our expectations are clear of one another. And then let's also shift from managing to leading. This by no means says that you should throw managing out the window. There's a time and place for it. But what we found is that when it comes to building relationships with our millennials, which is what they value the most, they don't quit their job, they quit their manager. They love being led. They love being coached. Okay, so here we go. One slide, all the mistakes on your left-hand side, all the tips for thrival on your right-hand side. It's just so you can kind of compare and contrast. We're moving from criticism to what went well. We're moving from avoidance of negative feedback altogether to challenges, building challenges in. We're moving from past to future. We're moving from no action plan whatsoever to preparing to act. And we're moving from not talking at all to talking like our life depends on it. And if our life depended on it, we would have a plan, we would have a structure, and we would have no hesitancy to make those conversations happen. Okay. We have made it through our mistakes. Is your head spinning yet? Because if it is, you're on the right track. And we do have some great news for you, because we have embraced at Talent Catalyst building a challenge culture. So with that said, we would never leave you on a webinar without challenges for you to take on either tomorrow or the following week. So here they are. Challenge number 1 is this week or tomorrow, well, next week or tomorrow, ask your manager about one hobby that they enjoy doing outside of work. Now, when you ask a millennial this, they most likely will light up, because for a millennial, it's not about work in life, and it's not about just balancing work and life. It's one and the same, right? There's a blend. And so when you ask a millennial about their life, it seems very natural and it helps build the friendship there, right? But millennials, we encourage you to ask your managers one hobby. They have a life outside of work too. Don't ask them about 10, just ask them about one. Baby steps, right? Okay, growth challenge number 2 is ask someone on your team for feedback on a project that you're working on this week. And remember, KISS, keep it simple, stupid, right? Keep it really, really simple. Ask them if they're open to feedback, open to giving you feedback. Ask them, make it simple. Just ask them 3 very concise questions about the feedback. Tell them how you think it went, all of this, and have that exchange. And make sure when they're sharing with you to actively listen. So listen and repeat back, listen and repeat back. And last but not least, third growth challenge is take on having one conversation that you usually avoid and report to your manager how it went. And we will be eager to see how these go, but try it. Try taking on one conversation that you're kind of dragging your feet on, and go back to your manager and tell him or her how it went. This is all about our development, right? Okay, so we've made it to the end of our webinar here, and today we promise to teach you a proven step-by-step strategy so that you can quickly identify conversation mistakes, check, strategically prevent them. Those are the tips. Check. Develop the agility to pivot in your conversations. Check. That comes with the feedback. It comes with the active listening. It comes back with a structure to actually talk and not talk at all, or not avoid it. And number 4, conduct conversations to build relationships of trust. At the end of the day, we believe at Talent Catalyst that the quality of our work experience for millennials or any generation is the quality of our relationships, and that is the key. So congratulations, you have made it to the end. And of course, our big question here is, how can we help you? We are so willing to help you at Talent Catalyst. If you felt like this is relevant, or that you really want to take this on in your organization, you can take it on in a small way, you can take it on in a big way. We're happy to get on the phone with you. We're happy to talk to you about workshops. We do half and full day workshops around the world. We're happy to do a keynote. Maybe you have an upcoming event that's going on. Maybe you have a young professionals network, a women's network, anything like that. We speak at those a lot. And maybe you have in mind an employee, or maybe it's yourself that could just benefit from some one-on-one or some team coaching around how to become better at conducting difficult conversations with your teams. That's absolutely an option. Also, just to let you know where we spend a lot of our time, we're in San Francisco, the Bay Area, a lot, and we're also in New York City a lot. So if we are nearby you, we would love to connect with you. We're also doing a lot of work in Salt Lake City, Mountain West area, Colorado, Salt Lake. And so if you find yourself there, we are very likely to be there as well. And so now we're going to leave the time open to question and answer. And at the end of this, Caroline is going to, if you have questions, just type them in your chat box, and Caroline is going to field those questions. And then at the end, we so appreciate your feedback about this webinar experience, and it should take 1 minute tops to share how it's been for you. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to let Caroline conduct this question and answer, and I'll pipe in here as needed. Take it away.
So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, and we'll make sure to answer them.
See some typing going on. This is good. And Caroline, do we want to pop up those feedback windows up, or does it conclude the whole thing?
We'll see it at the end.
Okay, we'll do it at the end. Okay. All right. Type away if you have any questions, and if you don't, we'll go right to the feedback. Okay. Okay. So Caroline's informed me the feedback is going to be in the survey after the webinar, so you should have that would be pretty good.
All right, thank you for joining our webinar today, and we look forward to you on future webinars. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.